NSFW, prison guards of Reddit, what's the most disturbing thing you've dealt with? Psych patient. After placed in an observation cell, pulls a razor out of his anus and proceeds to go to town on his genitals. Inmate in segregation, would regularly eat his own shit. Multiple bad fights and suicide attempts. Contractor fell 30 feet. Ankle was completely 90 degrees to his leg. Refused an ambulance or medical assistance for fear of being drug tested, assuming. Had 2 guys working with him help him walk the half mile to the front gate. Worst by far was a seg inmate slipping his cuffs. Removing an officer's bean slot bar, big chunk of iron with a prong on the end we used to open slots in the cell doors, to pass trays through / handcuff inmates, and beat him to death with it. Was one of the first responders. I quit shortly after this one. Edit, never worked there, but an inmate at the local county jail 2 weeks ago beat 2 female guards, killing one and leaving the other with brain damage. One of them worked for my mom for years. The world sucks. Former prison guard. I had to escort a new prisoner to medical. I had no idea why until we got to medical. He had bandages all over both legs and he walked stiff-legged, couldn't bend his legs. When he sat down, the nurse started removing bandages to expose rotted, abscessed flesh. He was a heroin addict and was injecting in his legs. His legs were so swollen and gangrenous that the smell almost put me down. When he tried to bend his right leg, the skin split and infection oozed all over the floor. The doctor looked at me and immediately called for another guard to come to the room. I asked what was wrong and she said, "You're going into shock. I need you to leave before you pass out." Surprised at what she said, I protested, but she demanded that I leave. On my way out, I started to feel lightheaded. I looked in a mirror and noticed that I was sheet white, normally a brown guy. I've seen people hanging. I've seen people stabbed and shot. I saw a guy blow his head off with a shotgun. When I was in the Corps, I pulled burned bodies out of a crash CH-53E. This, by far, was the worst thing I've ever seen. I knew a prison guard at Winson Green in Birmingham, and he said the most disturbing thing about Fred West was how jovial he was. The officers kept forgetting and laughing at his jokes and stuff and then thinking, this guy sexually tortured his own daughter and buried her in concrete. I was a co at a maximum unit for several years. I'll just make a list. I had a guy slice his own neck in front of me. Had a guy hang himself on a night we were very short. I had to stand there and wait several minutes for another person before entering the cell. We were able to save him. Had a guy hang himself and succeed. Had a guy collapse in front of me and die. He had a brain aneurysm. Had a guy try to connect his tattoo gun to the light. He electrocuted himself. He died. I've caught people having sex twice. Once was willingly and the other was for protection. I've been on the 3rd row and the power went out. It was pitch black for about 20 seconds. Power loss was always the scariest thing to me. Had a guy who had come in with a relatively minor sentence, now serving over 100 years consecutively due to crimes he committed while incarcerated. He would attack any co he had a chance to. He was notorious for popping his door open and attacking cops. Had different guys try to attack the nurses on a few occasions. If you ever go to prison, don't sow this. They're the ones who decide if you need to go to a hospital or go back to your cell and drink water. Had to fight a psych patient in the back of an ambulance on a transport. Had to sit through multiple surgeries because someone has to have eyes on the inmate at all times. Once I had to wrestle with an inmate when he was coming out of his anesthesia. He was out of it and freaked out. I have tons more, but I'm on mobile and it's a pain to type this much. My friend's mom was a prison guard when I was younger. We went there our whole class, and she told us about how inmates would break down mentally. One story I remember her telling multiple times. She was on night shift and was suddenly alerted by screams of help. The screams came from a cell, and her being careful, she looked inside the door window. There, in the farthest corner, an inmate was on a chair, screaming, pleading for help, and trying to avoid something on the ground. "Mom, what's wrong, inmate?" Apostrophe. "Inmate, it's the chickens. Please get them out." While still standing on the chair, jumping and crying. "Mom, what chickens? Where are they?" Apostrophe. "Inmate, everywhere." Exclamation mark. Please get them out. Apostrophe. So friend's mom opened the cell door and guided the invisible chickens out. The inmate calmed down. But as friend's mom closed the cell door, he screamed, "You forgot one!" Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Apostrophe. So she went back in and got the remaining chicken. Note: the inmate in this story was a big ass biker dude. He was probably on drugs, but I think it's a fun story. One of my old roommates worked in the county jail. He came home one day with a stone face, so I asked him how work was. All he said was, "I saw a guy eat his shampoo because he couldn't shower, then uncontrollably puke and shit himself. That's how my day went." Apostrophe. Jail. Not for me. I worked in juvenile corrections. One of my kids threw a tantrum before lights out. After lots of questioning, we eventually learned that it was because one of the other kids was threatening to rape him. My dad used to work as a co, and he would never tell me any stories about his time there until one day of constant badgering he told me the tale of the Easter surprise. Easter morning, one of the inmates thought it would be a brilliant idea to get completely naked and shove a toilet scrubber all the way up his ass, so the only part visible was his bristled bunny tail. He then proceeded to scream that he was the Easter bunny while trying to hop around and avoid the oncoming guards. Edit. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. I work closely with all the prisons in the state. There's one notorious inmate who likes to jerk off and throw his semen in everyone's face. Fellow inmates, guards, it doesn't matter. He's not strict to semen. Sometimes piss and shit. Just whatever he can get his hands on. My dad was installing a ventilation system at a women's prison. He had a nice chat and a sandwich with an inmate. After they said goodbye to each other, a guard told my dad that the woman was sentenced for life because she killed her husband and put the body through a meat grinder. Edit. I'm adding a bit of extra info for people asking for more details. This happened in 70s, and my dad was working under very lenient regulations. My dad and his co-workers were merely told not to interact with the inmates, but there were no significant consequences for them if said interactions happened. I had a neighbor who was a co at a juvenile prison in my city. There was a new kid at the prison one day. He was apparently very shy and very quiet. He had the misfortune of sharing a cell with one of the more violent inmates. His second night there, his cellmate unscrewed a screw from a bench and sat on his bed in the middle of the night. When he woke up, he said, "I'ma make you a pirate," and shoved the screw into the new kid's eye. My neighbor was the first co to respond to the kid's calls for help. When asked why he shoved a screw in the new kid's eye, he claimed that he looked at him the wrong way. That's a pretty ducked up situation, if you ask me, and not one I'd like to deal with under any circumstances. Oh boy, here we go. My first fight I responded to was a stabbing. Trying to contain that situation with nothing more than ox spray and gloves was a pretty grim welcoming to corrections. I try not to look at their charges because I find it hard to treat them the same after I find out that they are a violent sex offender. Almost every time an inmate is polite and seems like a decent enough person, I end up hearing their case in the news, and it is 9/10 sex charges. I saw a guy who slipped in the bathroom have his hip come completely out of his socket and his leg came out at a ridiculous angle. Trying to have a conversation with someone and de-escalate them when you can hardly see them because so much feces has been spread over the window. During a strip search, an inmate used his hands to make his butt cheeks say, "Excuse me sir, but do you have a breath mint?" But by far the most disturbing thing is the complete lack of accountability. 90% of these guys have convinced themselves that they are the victims and have done no wrong, never accountable for anything, and have a sense of entitlement that is more frustrating than anything to deal with than any other aspect of my job. Edit. Just adding a couple extra, seeing as you guys seem to be enjoying this. Becoming accustomed to being threatened is a pretty strange phenomenon. I didn't realize I had become desensitized to it until I was threatened by an inmate telling me, "I'm going to murder you and rape your wife." I told my family that it happened a few weeks later, just as a "oh by the way" sort of thing, and they were mortified. Whereas I had almost forgotten it happened. An inmate who was infamous for packing drugs in his rectum came in and completed his dry cell stint in segregation. Other inmates didn't believe him when he told them he didn't have any drugs on him this time, so they decided to check for themselves. They accomplished this with a Dasani water bottle enema. The host of medical conditions you see during strip searches is alarming at first. The list contains testicles the size of mangoes, genital warts larger than their penis, AIDS lesions always make me gag, and of course penis amputations always catch you off guard. Not really disturbing in a traditional sense, but still made me uncomfortable. I'm a co at the Denver complex for the Department of Corrections. Seeing James Holmes, the Aurora theater shooter, come through our processing after getting sentenced. I'd seen this man's face and heard the stories for 2 years on TV, but seeing him in person just slapped me in the face with a weird sense of reality. I don't really know what I expected, but it was pretty disturbing to me personally. If that doesn't count, then seeing an offender hanging from a sheet in their cell. Not me but my cousin. One day she found a guy cutting his dick open and sticking tiny plastic balls inside the wounds, and the inmate wanted it to heal like that so when he gets out it would pleasure the ladies. Edit, not fixing my small typo. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.